This week on Breaking Bullying, we are going to get a perspective from a former teacher and principal on how schools handle bullying. So we're going to hit that music and get started. This week, like always, we have a very special guest. We have Dr. Kymberli Boynton. She's a former teacher, elementary teacher, former principal, and currently a therapist, and also has a talk show coming out next year. Dr. Kimberly, thank you for being on our show.
Well, thank you, Tim, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Kim, let's get started and let's talk about your own personal experience with your child and how the school handled that with bullying.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was kind of funny because at that time I had just started teaching, so I was going to school full time as well. And so I dropped my son off at school. He was in I think he was in sixth grade. No, he was in fifth grade at the time. So I dropped him off at school like I do every morning, and I went to work. And so I get this phone call while I'm at work, and they're, we just wanted to make sure that we excuse your son's absence today. And I thought to myself, I was like, what do you mean he's absent? Like, I just dropped him off at school, an hour ago. And they said, no, he's not in his class. So, obviously back then I'm going to date myself, but we didn't have any cell phones.
Yeah,
So,
I get it.
we had the house phone. So I'm calling the house, no answer. And so I called the school back and I said, hey, I just want to verify, that my son is there. And they said, no, he's not here.
How long ago when you dropped him off and that phone call took place?
I had literally just got to work and I was teaching at the time. So it was within like a couple hours from the time
Okay.
I dropped him off and got to work. So it was about a 2 hour time period. And so of course, as a parent, I'm like, oh my God, where's my son? So I, left work and, the whole time I'm calling home and, there's no answer. I'm calling my mom. Nobody's heard from him. So now I'm just a little freaked out. So long story short, I get home and my son is sitting in the living room. He's just sitting there by himself. And so I walked in and I said, what in the world are you doing home? And he was like really terrified. And he's like, I can't go to school, mom. He said, because, this guy's mom is gonna beat me up. And I said, wait a minute, hold on. I said, what? He said, this kid at his school's mom was going to beat him up. And I said, what are you talking about? And he told me, and he never told me this the night before, but I guess the night before when he was walking home from school, it was him and his friend that lived in an apartment complex with us. Apparently, this kid that's been picking on my son at school was in the car with his mom, and the mom was chasing in the car was chasing after my son, and my son was so scared he ran into some random person's doorstep, knocked on the door, told him what was happening. He's being chased by this parent, and so some stranger ended up taking my son home. And I was like, wait, what? I said, why didn't you tell me this last night? And he said that he was scared because rightfully so, this parent is, following him and, trying to get him beat up. So immediately I called the school, and set up something. I said, hey, we need to address this right now. And so we get in there, and I want to say it was the same day, but later on in that afternoon, because I know they had to get back to me and get a hold of all the parties involved. So at this time, I'm asking my son, like, well, what's going on? Who are these kids? And it was two boys and a girl. And so I was like, okay, well, why are they trying to pick on you? And he said, because I don't like this girl. And I said, so what does that have to do with the guys? He's like, I don't know. He goes, but because I don't like this girl, they started picking on me. So long story short, they finally get back to me. So we all go to the school and we're in this big, huge, conference room. And at that time, and I don't know if they still do it in the schools because I've been out of the school system for a while, but we had what was called the Dare team,
Oh,
which was they had a police officer on campus. And they were the ones who looked out for bullying and, things, drugs and alcohol and things like that. So anyway, so the Dare officer was present, the principal was present, myself, my son, two girls, the two boys, and the parents of them, and then my son's best friend and his mom that was there that witnessed everything. So the loophole in this whole thing is we're sitting here and we're going around, we're trying to figure out, why this started and what happened. And so we started with the girl, and this girl had admitted, and they're all in the same grade, fifth grade. She admitted that she had asked the two boys to beat up my son because he didn't like her friend. And so when we got to my son and we were talking to him about it, my son was like, I don't even know her. And I said, we're like, what do you mean? You don't know who? He's like, I don't know her. And he was pointing at the girl who asked the boys to have him beat up. So all of us were in shock, like, what do you mean you guys don't know each other? So we asked the girl, like, do you know him? And she said, no. She said, so the long story short was her friend liked my son, but well, I guess, somebody sent a note to him, hey, do you like so and so, whatever the girl's name was? And he wrote back, no, I don't. And so because the girl was, crushed that he didn't like her, she told her best friend, which was that girl. And so her girl was sticking up for her best friend and went and got those two guys to beat my son up.
So where
And
did the
so
parent so was that girl supposedly the parent that your son thought?
no, it was one of the parents of one of the boys. And so that's where it came into play because apparently the boy, I'm just going to use the name Daniel, the boy Daniel, that with the mom that chased him home, we asked the mom, well, how did you get involved? And she said, well, my son told me that that he had to get this kid. And so I drove him. So we were all looking at this parent like, you're a grown adult and you are enabling your son and promoting bullying and chasing and terrorizing a kid. And so the dare officer, obviously at that time, was like, you could be looking at like some serious charges here, kind of, threw it at her. And then she tried to turn around. Well, I'm in school for probation. I was just, doing, my something with my son. So in other words, it's like there really was no excuse. She was literally enabling her son to do this. So what the dare officer did was obviously he suspended the three parties that were involved. But what he did, what I liked, was he said when they came back from their suspension, he wanted to do something different, which was making the three boys sit together at lunch every single day. And he said, by doing that, he said, at the end of this week, they're either going to like each other or they're going to hate each other. And then, we'll deal with it at the end of the time. Well, funny enough, the two out of the three boys bonded because they found out they were on the same baseball league. And so they were not on the same team, but they were in the same league. And so those two bonded. And because those two bonded, the other one with the mom who had chased him kind of ciphered himself out. They didn't not get along anymore, but they weren't friends. And then my son and this other kid became really close and he started sticking up for him, if that kid ever came around. But it never happened. But I really liked his approach because it did make sense. If you seclude them and, obviously they're under observation, but they put them together. And like he said, for a week, they didn't have anything to do. They could either sit there for 30 minutes and stare at each other and eat lunch, or talk and find something, that they can bond over. And I like that. So from that, when I went into teaching and became a principal, I started implementing that because I really liked the structure of it and it worked. And I had several kids that we did that with where I'd put them together and I know some of the other kids would come over and I'm like, no, I'm like, you need to stay away. This is their table right now. And it really worked. They either became friends. I don't think I ever had a situation where they didn't, not necessarily like friends, like besties or anything like that, but
Yeah.
they were cordial enough to where they respected each other on the playground. And so I really liked what they did, but they addressed it right away. Whereas now I've seen, even not being in the school system, but working with the school system as a therapist and having to intervene a lot, I see that things tend to sort of get pushed under the rug. Like they'll address it, but funny enough, it's not taken care of and taken as seriously. And I'm not saying this for every single school, so I don't want to get, I don't want to get shamed for, saying that every school handles it differently. But I can say I had a previous patient who recently, over the last year, had wrote a note to his friend. He was being bullied at school, passed a note to his friend saying, you know what, I can't take this anymore. I wish I could just kill them all. And so, of course, when he wrote that out of frustration, the friend turned that note in. Well, the dad was called, and because, he was explaining his situation, the principal of the school decide, because the whole school got shut down. That whole district got shut down that day for the threat. So they did what they were supposed to do in shutting the school down. But what happened in the interim of everything in meeting, the principal pushed it aside and said, "We're going to make this disappear." Well, thank God for dad, like he wasn't comfortable with that and came to us and was like, "We need help because my son didn't mean it, but at the same time, the way the school handled it, I'm not okay with it, even though it was on their side. He still knew enough that that wasn't right, that they just swept it under the rug." So, in investigating in this a little bit further, we found out that the ones who are being bullied, it's going in their chart. Hey, kids being bullied, John Doe's being bullied, on this day, this is what happened. But the ones who are bullying them, it's not going in their chart. So when a school gets, unfortunately something happens to that, level, you can go to the bully, the ones who are being bullied, and see they're being bullied, but where's the paper trail that the bulliers are the ones doing it? And then they wonder why this kid goes psycho and
Yeah.
does something, but nothing's happening to the bulliers to that extent. So that was kind of an eye opening for me. And this was just recently over the last year that I was like, are you kidding me? Like, I'm hands down as a principal, my tolerance for bullying was zero. And I feel like how we can, effectively, attack this and, help out is, I mean, there's a lot more resources that are available now than there were back then. We have the DARE officer obviously on campus, but now you've got nonprofit organizations like one of them, Boo to Bullying. They're really good about getting people to come out to different schools and be speakers and teach about anti-bullying and how to communicate your feelings, and how to do things like that. So definitely open communication with your child, talking about it. And so making that child feel that he's safe enough to go to somebody and let him know what's going on. But yeah, this bullying has always existed.
Yeah.
We spoke off camera about this, like with your experience, but bullying has always existed. It's just now the severity of it is just being more dramatic
Yeah.
than it, you know,
I just started our I joined my local United Way, and I started up their anti-bullying committee. So
good for
we just
you.
got that kicked off, and we did a big seminar back in October. Whenever you hear this podcast, but I
Yeah.
want to go back to putting kids, putting the bully and the target in a room together. We've had guests on our podcast where parents say, "That's not what I want. That's not what I want my child to go through. Why should they be in the same room with that bully?" And it was more of a negative. It was more negative than it should have been positive. It didn't work. Was there a backup plan, or I guess you know how schools are doing it now when they're trying to get the target and the bully together in a room? Because that's still what's going on, but it seems not to be as effective anymore.
Well, and again, it kind of goes back to how you tailor it as well too. And again, we're dealing with a different generation. Whereas, my generation, coming from where we're at, we're all for positive, whatever. Like I want to meet the parents. I'm not mad at them, but I want to understand like, what's going on. And obviously, like I said, we sat down and it turned out like my son didn't even know the girl who was trying to get him beat up. But in talking about it, and all the parents being able to communicate productively, it was a positive outcome. Whereas, like I said, now we're a different generation where, you know, this generation is all about like, I want my voice heard, like I
Yeah.
want to speak. But then the parents sometimes shoot it back. And it's usually, okay, let me rephrase that because I don't want it, to get, whatever again. But most of the time, in my experience, again, this is all from my experience that I've been dealing with, it's usually the parents who don't want that to happen, or the kid might be to that point where they're scared. It just every situation is different. I don't know how they're addressing it in the schools, but I know like the ones that I've been working with, the parents will always want to talk to the other parent, to
That's the
kind of find
missing
out.
yeah, that's the missing piece, I think, that we're seeing right now is the school has a policy, where the parent can't talk to the other parent.
Yeah.
So they're left in the dark, And I'm guessing if you want to try to make this work where the bully and the target sit together, we're missing that one part. The parents are getting together first because that's what happened first, right? Parents got together first, then the bully and the target sat down together and they had to
Right.
deal with that. That makes
Yeah.
a lot of sense.
And it's kind of a catch 22, to be honest, Tim, because even my grandson, he's 5 years old, and this just happened, I want to say like a month ago. My daughter called me and she was really upset because I guess my grandson, in kindergarten got bullied and he was circled up and he came home with bruises on him because they were kicking him and hitting him and things like that on the playground. And so my grandson said he went and told, but apparently the on duty teacher at the time or whatever told him, oh, well, you need to go address that with your own teacher because that wasn't his teacher, which of course my daughter and I were upset, and so my first instinct was like, well, we need to call the school and address this and talk to the teacher and find out. My thing is like I always want to investigate, and I think that's where it needs to start. The principal, whoever's in charge, if it's a teacher, a principal, whoever, needs to fully investigate before you go and act on it, so that way we know. I mean, because it could have been my grandson just saying that and he started it. But the outcome, when I talked to her, was the same thing like what you said. They wouldn't disclose what the outcome was to my daughter, but they let her know, well, we handled it, but we can't disclose what was said or what was done, which I disagree with because I would want to know.
Yeah.
I want to know what the repercussions were of that. And I think that now what they're doing is like, oh, well, let's just isolate everybody away from each other. Well, that doesn't necessarily work, because you got to get to the root of what's happening. You have to find out why this happened and, prevent it from happening again. And just by saying, oh, you stay in your corner and you stay in your corner, and we can't tell you, parent one and parent two, what was happening, it's just not effective. And
Well,
there's just a lack of communication.
when your grandson goes to the recess aide, that's where the investigation needs to start. That aide should have
Right.
said, "Okay, show me the kid."
Correct.
Why did that? I mean, that resource aide should have got spoke to because it's kind of
Yep.
hard to investigate something maybe a week or so later, and especially
Right.
with 5-year-old kids, they're gonna forget.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And 5 year olds, like one minute they're like mortal enemies, the next minute they're BFF. So it's like,
Yeah.
but you don't know that until you fully investigate it. And so all that happened as a result was his primary teacher told my daughter, oh, well, I'll go out on the playground with them and, watch over it, which she did. But at the same time, watching over, of course, these kids that are picking on my grandson aren't going to do anything when you actively know somebody's watching you. But she's not going to stand out there and give up her lunch break forever, So at some point,
Yeah.
she's going to go back to, having her lunch. And then what happens? And so, luckily, I don't know. And unfortunately, we don't know what the result was of all of it, but he's been okay. And they've been leaving him alone. But again, like, what message did they get from it? Like, we don't even know, was it, what was addressed in there. So for me as a parent, like, growing up in this day and age is completely scary for me because we have no control, and I feel like as time went on and the generations evolved, less and less control was or more control was taken away from the parent and put into the hands of the kids, and us not knowing is not doesn't go with me. Like, I want to know. Like, I don't care what the result is, as far as like, you slapped him on the hand and, not physically, but, give him that, hey, don't do it again. But I want to know, like, what did you do to prevent this from happening again? And when a principal comes to me and tells me, like, oh, we can't disclose that with you, I'm not okay with that.
Is there a law that says they can't do that, or is that something that the
Yeah.
district just makes up? There's a law.
No, I mean, I don't, let me take that back because I don't know because I'm not in the system, but I do know. I don't know if it's per school system, and I don't know if it's per law per
Or was it
se.
at your time? At your time, was it a law? Was there a law where you can't
No, there
disclose?
wasn't anything like that back when I was doing it. I think it's evolved. Like, even when my girls were going to my youngest is 26 and my oldest, my son, he's 38 now. So even when my girls were in school, we didn't have that. Like, if there was a situation, we always sat down, with the parents and, got involved with it. And somewhere along the way between, the millennials to the Gen Zs, where we're at now, and the Gen Alphas, communication has just been, lost, from parents, communicating with each other and being able to communicate. And then they come to us as a therapist and say, hey, my child needs help because this is what's happening at school. And, we're all I can do is, teach the kid or talk to the kid or my client that I'm working with on how to protect themselves. And I've had that so many times. But as a result, I've had a lot of teenagers over the last year, which I've never had before, want a 5150, and try to hurt themselves because they're afraid to go back to school.
Yeah.
And, the school's not actively taking the precautions that I feel they should, to make sure that these kids are safe.
Do you think the school is more worried about protecting themselves than the student? 'Cause I've heard there's this new term called conflict. It's not bullying anymore, it's a conflict.
Yeah.
You heard of that?
Yeah, it again, it depends on the school, it depends on the school district, it depends on, who's running the school and things like that. But I have heard that is more of conflict because they don't because bullying is such a negative term now, and so they don't like to call it bullying anymore. So now it's conflict and everything's conflict resolution, based or whatever. So it doesn't matter whatever word you want to give it, it's still a physical, emotional, mental act of abuse, that's bestowed upon somebody, against their own will. So call it what you want, but at the end of the day, I mean, this is your school, just like if it was my own business and I need to protect my employees, I need to protect my students to the best of my ability. You can't prevent everything from happening. Like you could do the best you can. And in the end, if it still happens, then you have to go to a more extreme resource. But at the same time, I'm not about reputation. My reputation is to protect my kids, students, whoever, I'm in charge of, versus that. So I mean, that's I don't know the exact answer to that because again, it depends on the schools and the imaging kind of a thing. But I can say that a lot of people are more about the image and about damaging an image. And I can speak from recent experience that I know teachers who have stuck up for a parent who was in the wrong versus their employee that was a teacher, out of imaging and out of losing business or out of losing kids. And I don't agree with that. And I'll be the first one to say something to that person like, that's not right. You should have protected your staff, you should have protected
Yeah.
your employees, but so yeah,
Back
it's yes and no to that.
back when you were teaching or even as a principal, how much training did the teachers get on how to recognize bullying and how to handle bullying?
During my time, none. There was none. We would do what I would do is we would have different staff days at that time. And again, like we really didn't have a lot of time off in back in my time of teaching or whatever, where now it's like they're always off for some staff day. And I think again, going moving forward, they started implementing it more the more they saw it. But back when we didn't have that. I had the protectiveness of, making sure at the beginning of the school year when I have the staff meetings and stuff like, hey, let's go over things, that we don't want to do. And to this day, even with the business, I own a performing arts academy. So I work with children and I'm very big with my staff, like never be alone with a child in a room, never give a parent or a student a reason to, point fingers at you for something and don't ever put yourself in that position. And so even with my performing arts academy, I installed cameras in there because I want to make sure that when if something like that did occur, we can go back and at least look at the footage and say, hey, this is what really happened or this is not what really happened. But I always have that talk every class time, every semester with my staff to this day on the things to not do. And if you think that it's going to make you look bad, don't do it. Even as far as hugging a child now. Whereas some people, we're natural, we want to love on the kids, but now even then that can be taken the wrong way. So I tell everybody just give them a high five, or give them knuckles, or something like that. So it just doesn't give that perception and leave room for somebody to take it the wrong way. And then next thing you've got something bigger on your hand.
Yeah. When you were a principal, what was the steps that the teacher had to take when they found out one of their students were being bullied? How did that get handled under your
They
guidance?
they came to me. So, I mean, I did witness or have that experience a lot, over my years. So right away they would come to me, and then what I would do was I would call the parent. Um, and well, first, actually, no, let me take that back. So what I did was when I found that out, I brought both of the kids into my office. And I would talk to them because, at that time people feared the principal. So, there was no, whatever, where now kids just don't care. But for me, it was a completely different era in time. So when the kids came, they're already like, oh no, I'm in trouble. I'm going to the principal's office. And I would have a conversation with them, just like I was, would be doing with you right now. It's like, hey, I understand there was something that went on. Why don't you guys, one at a time, tell me what happened? And they would say, one person would tell their side, the other one would tell their side, and then we'd resolve it. And I would call the parents and let them know. I mean, it always stopped at that point. I honestly can't even think of a time where it escalated after that because it was controlled. But we always had to write an incident report, so that we had the paper trail in it. And I would always call the parents, both parents, and let them know, hey, just wanted to give you a heads up. This is what happened today. When you come to pick up your child, let's have a talk real quick. And I would bring them together. So it was a lot of communication, but it got resolved right then and there where nothing ever escalated after that. And I really, thinking back in all those years, I never had the problems that we did today. And I'm not saying it was because of me or, whatever, but there definitely was more communication involved. And there definitely was more unity as far as working together to resolve a problem, versus now, where
Uh,
shutting the parents out is not effective at all,
yeah,
in my
and
opinion.
how much time did that take you to do to meet with both kids and call the parents?
Honestly, I would say maybe 30 minutes with the kids and maybe like another 30 minutes, with the parents, after school. Um, Worst case scenario, like an hour. It was never like longer than a day or even half a day. It was literally about 30 minutes of a time. Because when they were done, they'd shake hands because I always made them shake hands, or at that time they were able to hug. So the kids would
Yeah.
hug it out and then go back to class and they were fine. And even the parents, like I never had any feud with any of the parents bringing them in, and the parents are very apologetic. Oh, I'm so sorry, my kid did that to you. And then even they would come in with their kid and they would, the person who was bullying the kid would tell them, "Oh, you know what? You're in trouble. You shouldn't have did this." And I would tell them, like, you know what? We've already, discussed it. We already talked about, what would happen with the repercussions or whatever, So, you know, it was a lot of communication, but literally, I would say 30 minutes each time for both of them, and it was squashed. Like we just didn't have it again.
How big was your school?
It was well at that time. Well, it depends because I was at different ones. So I've had a full school of elementary kids from like maybe like 500 students, 200 students at the time. Well, definitely the class sizes back then were about 32 kids per class. So I think that was like the biggest amount they were allowed to have with the teacher's aide at the time. So you got to figure like however many grades there were. And at that time, we went to sixth grade. So 32 kids, and there was like at least a couple classrooms per grade. So yeah. So about, yeah, roughly around there.
500. So it's
Yeah.
500 kids. Was that K through 6 or K
Yes.
through
Oh,
5th?
pre-K through 6.
Okay. Because my theory is the reason why it's not happening as of now is schools are just overpopulated. There's
Oh
not
yeah.
enough staff. Their principal probably doesn't have 30 minutes a day
No.
to do that, or an hour a day, 60 minutes total. So my thought is, why can't they hire a part-time person to do that? Or can they make a janitor or somebody that students like? Because in schools, everybody had a favorite somebody. I've
Absolutely.
always
Yep.
I always had the favorite janitor in high school. His name was Claire. The favorite janitor. Everybody had a favorite staff
Yep.
person. Pay that person extra money to handle it. Give them some time off because you think that would be valuable for the school to say we have like maybe zero instance of bullying might be far fetched, but our bullying is our bullying reports is very low. if they just put that effort in finding a staff person to take care of it, that maybe wants more hours or has the time. I'm not sure what teacher does have time these days. I feel like right now in my town, we're trying to pass this big referendum, and a lot of it's going to sports, and it's going to improve the schools as well too. It's not just all going to sports, but it's like, how about pay the teachers more or get more staff to combat the issues that are killing kids? Because we have kids in our area that commit suicide because of bullying.
Yep.
Why? What's your thought? I guess what's your thought on today's school systems and how we can possibly resolve this or to
Well,
get it back to back in the old days?
yeah, no, you hit the nail on the head with that the staff now doesn't have that 30 minutes or that hour in their day, because definitely the job titles and job descriptions have changed over time to where a counselor would be the one to deal with these type of issues normally, but a counselor can't even deal with, their workload and handle, a problem that comes where now the good thing about it is now they are seeing the effects of not having a person there. So now, at least out here anyway, they are bringing school psychologists in. They are bringing in, even pre-COVID, I worked with a nonprofit organization where they were bringing life coaches in, where it was just somebody like, a big brother or big sister, to come in and just say, hey, and they would, find the ones that would have issues or whatever and send them to have somebody to talk to as an outlet. So they weren't a therapist, but they were considered a life coach. And then obviously when COVID happened, everything just kind of stopped. And so we're just now starting to be able to hire on more people. And I don't know what happened for like a good minute there. Nobody wanted to work. So I was like,
Yeah.
well, what happened? Did everybody win the lottery during COVID that I missed? Like, why is there nobody wanting to work? And so now here, anyway, we do have school psychologists. A lot of my students or my clients that I work with that are teenagers have somebody they can go to. They have a school psychologist. There's another school that I know I've worked with where they have what's called the timeout room or the Zen room or something, where it's this big room and they made it comfortable and like kind of zenful and peaceful, whatever. And they tell the kids like, hey, if you need it, sign up and you get like a 30-minute window to just kind of go in there and chillax, because sometimes these kids need a mental break. And I like that they do that. Um, because sometimes they do need that mental break. So schools are now starting to implement some resources that kind of got lost along the way from my time to this time. But like I can attest, like one of my clients have recently told me that she has an English teacher that's kind of like her at school therapist, because sometimes they don't like this therapist they see at school, but they find that teacher. And I know for me growing up, when I was going through my trying times in high school, I had that teacher, which was my science teacher. And so it was like that motherly figure, that therapist on campus thing. But where what you were talking about as far as like bringing, why can we have the janitor? Why can we do this? A lot of people now are so happy that, like, if my kid comes home and tells me, oh, well, I did that because the janitor told me to. Now all of a sudden they're suing the janitor, they're suing the school, so a lot of it comes back to, you know, not being able to, to say the right things and not have that fear of you're going to get sued for saying it. And I have that all the time, even with, Sean Keenan and I were talking about that. Like, we have to be careful when we do our shows, not to say the wrong thing, because somebody's going to come back and like target us, and like shame us and bully us and, or, sue us for something, and we've all seen it on TV, like, like what, Dr.
Yeah.
Phil, he's gone through his fair share of stuff. So it's so sad that we just have to watch what we say and how we say it. Whereas, why can't we just speak how we feel and, not be so sensitive about it and communicate why I feel the way we do? Because, like I tell my patients, like, your feelings are the one things that are validated, So express your feelings, and get to the root of why you're feeling that way. But communication is so hard nowadays, and that's what's happening. But you hit the nail on the head. Like, they have so much more stuff put on them in their roles as a teacher, as a principal, where before as a teacher, I went to school, taught my class, went home, done. Graded some homework at night, went back, did it the next day. Now these teachers have more pressure on them to do more things, but at the same time, if there was a situation on the playground, the teachers are physically not allowed to even break it up, which blew me away because I was like, "Are you kidding me? So what are you supposed to do? Just stand there and let them go at it?" And then,
Exactly.
so, but that's what's happening now too. They can't physically do anything. They can't break up a fight. And I know a lot of colleagues that I had from the past who've gotten fired because they tried to break up a fight. And it's like, are you kidding me? So I don't understand the theories on a lot of this stuff.
So do they just
Um,
call the cops and let the cops
yeah,
show up to
they call the police. They
that could
call the
take
police.
5, 10 minutes.
Well, maybe in your town, like out here in a bigger city, that's a lot longer than 5 minutes. But usually they have the on-campus security. I forgot what they're called now, but they do have the on-campus security that are able to come break that up. I guess they don't want somebody who's not in that position or has that title to get involved in it because of the fact that I don't know if there's special training they're supposed to go through or
Well,
whatever. But
there we
uh,
go, on-campus security. If you had to go like, our schools hire law enforcement to patrol the schools. We actually got rid of it, and then beginning of the year, our school had this huge fight. It went viral, like a big, huge fight. And then after that fight happened, like, oh, we need to bring the law enforcement back into our schools again. But okay, let's start letting the law enforcement officers handle it. But then again, what I'm hearing now is, well, it's not bullying, it's a conflict, so it doesn't require
yeah,
any intervention. Which I'm so confused on this whole thing. I don't get it,
yeah,
and it's
me
hard
either.
when you're trying to run an anti-bullying campaign when nobody wants to own up to what's going on in in their school. So the
Right.
best that I do right now is like, well, I'm gonna work with kids to teach them about confidence, make them
Yep.
not targeted anymore. That's what I can do for right now until the schools need to put something in place that's better than what they got now. 'Cause
Oh, yeah, no. Yeah, no, I hands down agree, and that's the same thing I do is, I just help empower the kids, give them a plan, a safety plan, create a safety net for them and make sure that they are telling somebody and not keeping it in. But then again, it's like I said, it goes back to this has been going on for years, it's just the evolution of where it's become and the resources that they have, which we do have the resources here, but for whatever reason from the time somebody comes in and gives this great speech about anti-bullying to they get out and start bullying again, like something went wrong. But again, and I say this too from a parent standpoint, a lot of things that have happened over the years is they took the power away from the parents and gave it to the hands of the children. So what child now is afraid of their parent? They're not, because they've got all the power. What child is afraid of their teacher? What child is afraid of their principal? They're not, because they know they're powerless. What are they going to do?
what power do kids have that their parents don't?
So, for example, whereas like, when my kids were growing up, if they did something, they got, sometimes they got a spanking, not like I didn't beat
Oh
them
yeah,
or they
yeah.
would get a spanking. We can't do that anymore. Funny enough, you can't take away a child's cell phone anymore, at least out here. I actually
What?
had, yes, I actually had a patient
No.
whose kid called the police because the parent took away the cell phone because they got in trouble for something, and the police came out and made that parent give the cell phone back and said that's their form of communication. You cannot take that privilege away from them. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. And so for myself, because I work a lot with law enforcement, and I'll ask them, like, hey, is this like a law now? Like, whatever. And different police officers have told me, that I guess it depends on who the police officer is and, at the time and what the situation is. But if it's something that's preventing them from getting help, or it's something that's preventing to, like, if they're in an abusive situation and that parent takes that phone away and says no, you're not calling the police, then that's considered, the parents in trouble for that. So I don't know, it's just all confusing because for me, what I personally, and this is just my personal opinion, I think everybody tailors the situation to whatever, is happening at the time and who the person is. and what their beliefs are too, or what the
Yeah.
image is at that time. Because there's no situations out here that are the same and get the same results. So it's just crazy. But the kids definitely have more power because I mean, it started even when my kids were younger. When I was like, you know what, you're in trouble, or I'll like, throw something at them because it made me mad. And then I remember my daughter one time, she was like, "You can't do that to me. I'm gonna call the police." I said, "Well, then you know what? Then we're both going to jail." I said, because I said you were both leaving in an ambulance. But it was those things that we used to be able to say to our kids, and now it's like, oh, you can't even say that, without being at your door.
The workaround with the phone issue is stop paying your kid's phone bill or just shut the
Right.
line off because if that phone does not have any phone service, it still has 911 service at
Yeah.
all times. So I guess that's
Yeah.
what we have to do. But I
Yeah.
did that to my daughter. My daughter's 17 years old and she's got um I can't remember what uh oppressive disorder. What is that called? Can't think of it. Oppositional defiance disorder, ODD.
Yeah. ODD.
So I suspended her phone line. She was 16 years old. She went to this well, I'm gonna say it, Verizon. She went to Verizon with her suspended phone line. At 16 years old with no ID, she was able to take that phone off my account, get her own phone line, new phone number on a prepaid plan, got her phone back.
Yep.
I'm like, how how can a 16-year-old kid just take their parents' phone off their bill and make it their own? But
Oh,
apparently you can do that. But if I wanted my wife to get her own phone plan, you have to go through all this hoops and ladders. But a
yeah.
kid does it, Verizon will let you do it. So
That's why I said, like, the power has been put into the hands of the young adults. And it's crazy because that you said that, because I remember I had a student in my performing arts academy and he got in trouble at school for something. So his mom took his phone away from him. And so this was a kid that was constantly on his phone. Like, I mean, what kid isn't always on their phone nowadays? But when he was at rehearsal, he had his phone. And so remember his mom telling me, he got in trouble and he got his phone taken away. So I told him, I said, "Oh, I'm like, did you get your phone back?" And he's like, "What?" And he got the shock look on his face. I said, "Oh, because your mom had told me that she took your phone away. You got in trouble." And he goes, "Don't say anything to my mom." He goes, "No." He goes, "I don't care. She could keep my phone. I went and bought one at Walmart." I'm like, what?
that's
So kids are
it,
like getting more creative, like they're thinking outside the box, but it just goes to show they have more access and more resources than what we did when we were growing up. We couldn't, we didn't have cell phones, so what were they going to do? Like I remember my mom, I would sneak on the phone, the line landline. So my mom got creative too, and she started taking the cord. So I had a receiver and I had this base, but there was no cord to connect it to. So that was their way of like, taking away our privileges. And we couldn't, what were we going to do at that time? They didn't sell phones in the store. You had to go through whatever company it was, and
oh
get the
yeah.
phone from them.
And you
Well,
had to
now,
do a credit report too. You had to do a credit report too as
right.
well back in
Yeah. So a lot of people, I remember for a long time, I was like, oh, my credit's bad. Like, I'm not going to get a cell phone, so I went with a pager, but nowadays everything is just so accessible. So that's why I said, like, a lot of the power has been put in the kids' hands. And even down to the medical field where, after 13, or yeah, I think it's like 13 now, they can come and you can't tell your parent, for the HIPAA, reasons, you can't disclose at 13 years old why your child was at the doctor. I don't agree
yep.
with that. They're still they just went through, the change of life, transitioning from a kid to a teenager, and you're not going to let me know why my kid is at the doctor? Like there's just so many things that just I don't know. I'm glad I'm not a parent in this day and age as a young kid. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, I have 5 kids.
Oh
My
gosh.
oldest is 21 years old. My youngest is 2 months old. So
Oh my goodness. So you got the
we get
alpha generation.
yeah, we have so I got my preschooler, she's 5, Georgia. Right now, life is school is good for her right now, so I hope it stays that way. And then my 17-year-old, Rihanna, I think her senior year is much better. I think she's having a really good year. She had a tough time in school. She was never bullied. She's a tough kid, But just with I think kids also have stress of a lot of homework. I think they get dumped on with homework. I've seen like I get emails how much homework is due for one class. I'm like, did you ever do anything in this class? And she says she does. Your word for it. I was like, dang, there is a lot of stuff kids got to do these
Oh,
days for homework. I didn't have, I don't recall doing a lot of homework after high school. Maybe a half hour worth of homework. That was it. Nothing big.
well, and that's the other thing too is that they are oversaturating the kids with a lot of stuff, and not just even homework, but they're teaching them stuff that we didn't even learn until upper grades that they're starting a lot younger. So now what's happened, even right now, my grandson being in fifth grade, or my other I have eight grandchildren, so my oldest grandson is 19, but I know when my older grandkids were coming home, and they were like, "Grandma, can you help me with my homework?" And I'm a teacher, I'm a principal, and I'm looking at their homework like, I don't even wait, what grade are you in? Like, what is this? I don't even know that. So what's happened too, you got to remember the millennials, they were the ones that were dropping out of school. A lot of them during the millennial years were like, "Oh, I'm not finishing school," and they would drop out. So now you have the millennials that are raising the Gen Zers and that are raising the alphas. If they didn't finish school or they didn't understand school and they didn't have those resources in those millennial years, how are they going to help the Gen Zers with their homework? So they're just like, "Hey, I don't know what to do. I don't know what this is. You're on your own, figure it out." And then they put that pressure back on the teacher. So the teacher's now like, "Okay, well, I'm failing your kid. You got to help your kid at home." And the parent's like, "I don't know how to help my kid. I don't even understand this
Mm.
stuff." So again, it's just, and for me, there was a couple private schools that I taught in, and one of the schools that I taught in, I really liked their philosophy on it. They believed in, I believe it was like I think it was a Christian school at the time, and they had the philosophy of family time was family time. So your kids go to school from this time to this time. All school work should be done in school. So when they leave school, that's family time, to keep that bond together. And I liked that. And I thought, that's a really good, philosophy to have, because you're right. Like, as a parent, you're at work all day long and you want to come home and, spend time with your family, but your kid doesn't want can't because he's got to do all this homework. The kid may want to spend time with you, and his family or his friends, and can't because he's got all this homework. So now there's this stress, between both sides of we're not, and here's the kid in therapy, like, I don't spend enough time with my kid or my parents, and my parents are telling me, well, we can't get our kid out of the room. And the kids over here because I have all this homework to do. So now it's like, chaos. And now they're all coming to me because everybody's stressed out, you know.
Yeah. So we
But
got
I
we
like
got
that philosophy.
so we got stressed out kids,
Yeah.
and then we got bullying on top of that.
Yep.
Sometimes, I wonder if the stress on the kids make the kids act out in a negative way. They have to release
They
that
do.
anger. Yeah.
They do. And again, only speaking from experience and what I deal with down here, a lot of the times what I find is when I bring, because normally when I get a kid, or a young adult, like they want to be called, when I get a youth or a young adult that comes to me, I have the parent always come in, because that way I can hear what the parent's concern is. Because you normally, if you have just the kid in your thing, they're going to say, "Oh no, everything's okay. I don't know why I'm here. Everything's perfect." And their perception is like, I'm not the one who has issues, my parent does. But when you bring the parent in, that's why I like to bring them in together, hear both sides of it, and then I'll work with, the young adult, or whatever you want to say, kid, by themselves. But what I find out a lot of it is the parents just, they don't want to deal with it. They don't know how to deal with it. They don't want to talk to them about, what it is. They don't understand it, especially with the whole pronoun thing and gender identity thing. That's like a huge thing out here for us. The parents just don't know. And so what I'm finding, and this is the reason why Sean and I started this talk show, and I own a magazine too, and this issue of the magazine is called Voices Heard, because over the last year, every single youth, young adult, whatever you want to call them, all they want to do is have their voices heard. They don't care
Yep.
if you understand what they're going through or not. They just want you to validate, like, "Hey, I have these feelings. I know you don't get it, but can we at least try to work on it together?" And that's where I come in and I bring the parents together, and I'm like, "It's okay. You don't understand what they're going through. They just want to hear from you that you validate their feelings, and that you will try to work together. And the minute that happens, now things are starting to get better. And so that's why we started this show, was so that we can get these teens, these young adults, this Gen Z, Gen Alphas, to get their voices heard. I'll be the first one when I have somebody that comes in with a different pronoun or different identity. I'm the first one to tell them, like, hey, I don't understand, what that is, but I validate your feelings, and let's talk about it and see, what we can do, to
Yep.
support or overcome or
I've
whatever it is their goal is.
What they want from people is someone to listen to them. That's all
Yep,
they want.
that's
It's
all they
simple.
want.
Just
Just
and
listen, people.
I think that is also where the school is dropping the ball because the
Yep.
teachers don't have time to listen.
No, they
And
don't.
I know they want to listen. And sometimes I speak up for the schools. I look at their on their side too, is
Yeah.
they're understaffed,
Yep.
they're under stress too. Somebody in the upper level of education just needs to be on their plate and take care of this issue.
Absolutely. I agree. Hands down. I have a lot of teachers as patients, and they're wanting to leave. Like, they're telling me, like, I love my job. When I started in this, it was because I loved it. Obviously they went to school for it and spent money, and then, in debt with student loans like myself. And that's why I left being a principal. I literally went from thinking, like, what, I want to be a principal so I can make a difference in the school. I lasted like maybe a few years, and after that it wasn't what it was, because we didn't have the control. It came from the powers that be, in the school district, to where it wasn't fun anymore. So here I was like invested all this money into going to school to get a master's degree to be a principal, and I left. I actually left, went back to teaching for 2 more years, and then retired. It was crazy, and the pay's not there. It was more than, you have to love what you do in teaching, because the money really isn't there. Like, they're not paid, a lot of money that people think. And so you have to do it for the love. But then when that love goes sour because you're not getting the support from what you need, then now you've got these teachers that are checking out, like, I'm not paid enough to be here to deal with this, and not having any support. And unfortunately, I have a lot of teachers that are patients that are ready to, move on to something else. And it's sad because, like I said, and myself included, I spent a lot of years and a lot of time and energy and passion into what I did, for it to not make a difference, in the end, for me. Like, I really didn't have control, even though it's my school. I had somebody else over me that's like, you can't do that. And I'm like, but why? No matter what, if it made sense, you still don't have the final say so. And
Yeah. This this may be an unpopular opinion, but I feel that at least the schools that I live around, we put more money into athletics, which I
right.
agree it's very important. Very important for kids to get that athletic sport because it builds social skills and teamwork skills, all that great stuff. But I never seen a referendum with a note saying we want to increase teachers' pay by 20,000 each a year. Like, how you can spend $120 million. How much of that could you pay more a teacher instead? Let's get the kids' safety put in place first, get their needs, mental needs put first. Because, yeah, our track's outdated. I ran on it. It looked fine to me 20 years ago. I mean, do we need a fancy track? Do we need fancy football turf? No, kids can play on your grass and dirt. Who
Mhm.
cares? I feel like we're spending the money in the wrong areas first. But that's my opinion. Some parents will say, "No, we need this new stadium or we need something." I feel like our mind's in the wrong spot.
Yeah, and that's been the fight for years. I mean, even, as a teacher and a principal back in, my time in the early 2000s, late 90s and stuff, it was still the same thing. Nothing has changed as far as that goes. And I've always believed the same thing that you're saying as well too. And even with my kids going through school and being on the back end, when I left the education field and I went on, the PTA, part of it, and was on campus and, on that side of the fence, it was the same thing. Like, it was always the athletic department that had more money, in their foundation and in their organization than ASB or Red Cross, or things that are actually like worth something. Not saying that sports isn't, so don't get me wrong, but that was always the biggest fight with the parent, teacher committees of why is the athletic department always getting what they want, and here's band is suffering, choir is suffering, theater is suffering, Red Cross for that matter, our first responders are suffering. And the first thing when there's budget cuts, what goes? All the other stuff.
That
But what stays strong is the athletes, so it's like, what in the world where, they started taking away all these things in school. Like when I was in school, I mean, we had driver's training, we had every single thing, wood class, metal shop, yearbook, whatever. And now that's the first thing that gets cut is they start taking away the extracurricular activities, and then they wonder why their kids aren't active anymore and why the kids get in trouble. They have nothing to do. They need that stuff in school. And then when they're limited on, oh, we only offer this, this, and this, well, what if the kid doesn't like this, and this? Now what are they gonna do? Now they have no reason to go to school. And it's just education, and this all this stuff is like I could go on for days with what I think is wrong
yeah.
in my opinion and what I've seen throughout the years. But I mean, it has been, and nothing's changed. The athletics departments are always the stronger, and they always come first, unfortunately.
Kim, if you were principal today or you had the powers today to change how bullying is handled in schools, what would that look like?
It would look like what I did back in the early 90s or late 90s and early 2000s is communication. I'd bring the kids together, let's resolve it, let's bring the parents in, let's resolve it, and not keep things from them, and educate them and put more money into my teachers, and have those resources available, and give the powers back to the ones who are out there with the students that see this stuff. you know um Definitely not give the power to the kids, but more effective communication with everybody.
And do you have any advice for teachers or principals right now who may not know what to do or how to handle their current bullying situation?
Go back to the basics. Communication is everything. Getting to the bottom of everything. I know everybody has these fears, but if you handle it the right way and you communicate and you're open and you're active listening and just getting to the problem, it's really more effective than just trying to deal with it and separating everybody and thinking it's going to go away. It's not. If you don't have if you're not at the root of the issue, it's like a tree. Here's the root, here's this, and then the stems and the leaves. Each of the leaves are just a little situations, and then the branch. But if you don't get to the root of why this is happening, it's going to keep happening. So you have to find the root, not just tackle the situation. Maybe somebody took the lunch money today. Well, why did they take the lunch money? They didn't have any money. Well, why didn't you have any money? Mom didn't give me. Okay. And then now you've got the root to it. This kid is angry. He came to school, whatever. Get to the root of the situation by communicating. And there's no harm in communicating effectively.
Dr. Kim, thank you so much for being on our podcast. If people want to find you, how can they do that?
It's literally my first name, last name.com. So KymberliBoynton.com. And if you guys notice it, I mean, I don't know, I'm sure you're going to put a link or something in there, but my name, Kymberli, is definitely spelled differently. It's just Kymberli. It's literally the I and the Y reversed, but it's my first name, last name.com.
Awesome. And what about your show? When's that come out? Do you guys have a date or
Yeah, well, we're everything kind of got pushed back with the SAG strike because obviously, Sean Kanan being SAG, we're in pre-production of it, but we're hoping that the SAG strike ends, sometime within this year. And obviously, him as Mike Barnes, so he's got to go shoot the last season of Cobra Kai. So we're hoping that it all can get done and launched by the end of next year.
and what's the name of that show?
Keeping it real with Kim.
I love it. Thank you, Kim, not having us on. Thank you, Kim, for coming on today.
Well, thank you for having me, Tim. It was a pleasure. I really enjoyed it.